This is Lauren Burke. This is Lauren Live. I am going to go over the five must see tributes that I saw yesterday on the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., who, of course, passed away early yesterday after midnight. And that's going to be easy to do because there were a lot of really great tributes. I'm going to roll a part of the open, check the audio, and I'll be back after that. Okay, everybody, thanks for watching. I'm going to do a little brief show here on some of the best tributes I saw yesterday with regard to Jesse Jackson Sr., of course, an amazing career that spans from, of course, the modern civil rights era in the United States, Martin Luther King, all the way to the election of the first black president of the United States. Pretty incredible career, to say the least. There were a few tributes that I had noticed that were really good, either because they had some really interesting content or they hit things that people didn't bring up or they involved people who knew stories that nobody else knew. I'm going to start with a basic one. This is just PBS. PBS did a really good job of going over the basic facts of his life, of course, but the best part was they had Andrew Young. And anytime you have a first person observer of history who was alongside Dr. King and Jesse Jackson, that's going to be a pretty good tribute, and it was.
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I spoke with him earlier today and asked him about Reverend Jackson's role in pushing for civil rights.
Well, Reverend Jackson was the second or third generation, but in a way, he follows best under the generation of students coming out of the 60s and the sit-ins, and that started the sit-ins. This was 5 years after Martin Luther King started the Montgomery bus boycott. It was this background and the fact that he grew up in the Negro church that prepared him for leadership.
I mean, this is an obvious thing. Most obvious thing you can do in journalism is just have an interview of somebody who was there, which is effective. It's extremely effective. I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered last night, and Cora Masters Barry was sitting there, and it was pretty incredible because, of course, the stories that she can tell are going to be the stories that nobody else is going to know about. She's in a space as a witness to history that almost nobody is in. There were a few people on set last night to fit that description, and she certainly was one of them. I didn't even realize, and I'm somebody who's a history major, the closeness between Marion Barry and Jesse Jackson Sr. I learned that last night from Cora Masters. I should have known that, but I didn't know that. I should have known that actually from the photography. But I like the job that PBS does here because, of course, they use the full complement of what they can find photographically out there of Jesse Jackson. I love that they did that. And of course, when you have Andrew Young speaking in the background as these photos are rolling, it's pretty freaking effective.
Mixed it with the modern jazz of the 60s and the kind of a hip hop sort of give and take speech, as though you're preaching to yourself. You numbers of people.
I'm skipping ahead in part because I don't want to get a copyright ding, and in part because I want to go over to the photos.
He was a great speaker before a crowd, and he was always able to gather a crowd. In fact, every Saturday,
you see Aretha Franklin back there behind him.
Saturday morning, he rallied the churches of Chicago, first in Operation Breadbasket, and then Operation Push.
I mean, I love the reel that PBS used here. Again, straightforward, simple, and good. I am going to put the links to all of these all of these must-see videos. I'll put the links in the chat. Obviously, that was Andrew Young, and that was PBS. Um, it was just, I mean, it was just really good. It was only a 5-minute segment, but it did the trick. It did the trick. The second one I want to bring up here is one of two involving members of the Jackson family. The Chicago stations, as you might imagine, did a very good job yesterday of paying tribute to Reverend Jesse Jackson. They've got the footage. They've got the people who were around who covered him at the time. And obviously, they have the family members of the Jackson family close at hand in Chicago. And they took full advantage of their geographical, location. They had two of the Jackson kids on, and I should say this, Jesse Jr. is running, looks like he's going to run again for Congress. Right now, of course, Jonathan Jackson is in Congress. Jesse Jr. was in Congress already and was an extremely exciting member, and it would be very exciting to see him return. But here he speaks about his father, and he imparts some details that I don't think had been reported in the media.
Condolences to you and to your family. I know you were with him during his final moments. Is that right?
Yes, I was.
So
Dad died. Dad died this morning at 12:35 a.m. At which time I had just a few moments before heard him take his last breath. At 12:37, I went to my mother and I woke her up and I said, "Mom, I think Dad is not breathing." And she said, "He'll wake up in a couple of hours. Just let him rest." I said, "Mom, Dad's not breathing." She got up and confirmed our worst fears. And we began organizing and calling family members as well as caregivers. And once the caregivers came, the official nurses came, they declared that Dad had died at 1:52.
well, I know that you were able to spend obviously the last few months by his side. What do you, as you think about it, on the day of his passing, want him to most be remembered for?
I think I want him to be remembered for his care and concern for other people. And even in his suffering in the final stages of his life, I looked closer at the nature of his suffering, and I thought about people who are suffering at his age in a similar capacity. And therefore, I believe that caregiving ought to be elevated to a civil right in the United States. Conservatively, Dawn, we spend about $550 billion a year.
Now, he goes into a thing here about caregivers. And of course, because the baby boomer generation is getting older, the need in the healthcare industry for caregivers is huge. And as somebody who had a grandmother who lived to be 99 years old, I know what that looks like. Of course, we all know it's very expensive care. For the disease that Reverend Jackson had, it must have really been expensive care. He goes into that, but the more interesting part comes a little later when he brings up his father going to his football games and him as a young man realizing that, his father, well, he kind of imparted that his father would show up to his games and he did not know when his father was going to show up. I thought that was interesting. I assume he went to school in Washington, D.C., because somewhere in this interview, Jesse Jackson Jr. says something like, George Bush used to run at the track at my high school. And I'm thinking, where did he go to high school? It's probably Sidwell Friends or something, one of the private DC schools, I suspect, but I don't know that for sure. But he mentions that. There's a few stories in here that are really interesting.
And if he had the power, if he had the energy, and if he had the life left, I am confident with his own experience that he would turn his attention to making sure that these men and women get the kind of benefits, the kind of tax breaks, and the kind of support that they need to care for loved ones. That's not happening in the United States. Dad took every single day of his life very seriously, and he turned pain into power and into action.
And Jesse, he cared for you too. Speaking of caregiving, all of the branches of his tree, so to speak, all of his children, a couple of you have gone into politics. How are you hoping to continue his legacy now, obviously, as you run for the seat again?
It is particularly challenging because my father, as you heard in the opening salvo of the show, has a legacy in so many different corners of the nation's existence and its culture. But I can say this, at this hour where democracy is being challenged, where the right to vote is being challenged, this stage of my ministry is very consistent with where my father was in 1984 and 88. We need voices on the floor of the Congress of the United States who are fighting authoritarianism, who are fighting the oligarchs, but have never lost sight of the need to make sure that everyone has health care, that everyone has a decent, safe, and affordable home, that our schools are built of equal high quality.
He's getting a lot of his, I think he's getting a lot of his congressional message in here, which is fine. But he turns, at some point, he does turn to some more personal remembrances of his father, which is why I think this is a must-see interview.
Greatest memory of Jesse as your dad. And as a grandfather, I would see him at, many events with our children at school as simply grandpa. What was your greatest memory as a dad? And what about your nieces and nephews as well, and your children?
Dad was present. He would surprisingly show up at some events that we might expect him not to show up at. Whenever I played football in high school, I would look out on the crowd and see my father sitting there. He would never let me know that he was coming. And one fond memory was I saw all of these guys in trench coats in 1984. They showed up at the football game that I was playing. And I said to myself, wow, maybe George Bush is going to be running around the track, which then Vice President George Bush did regularly at the high school that I attended. And they weren't there for George Bush. My father had just been assigned a Secret Service detail. And he was, at the hour that he had been assigned that, one of the most challenged campaigns and candidacies in terms of death threats was that of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, assigned his Secret Service detail to Jesse Jackson Jr. far earlier than the other Democratic candidates. And I had no idea that that level of security was being provided for my father. That was shocking for me, but it was also the realization that Jesse Jackson had a mission, he had a plan, and he knew what he wanted to do.
So, yeah, there's a few little things there that are new to me, at least in terms of stories about Jesse Jackson Sr. Of course, it would be no surprise that he would require a load of protection. I mean, that is not surprising, unfortunately. The same thing happened to Barack Obama. And yeah, I mean, but I just thought from the perspective of Jesse Jr., it was an interesting interview to watch. And along those lines, his sister Santita was also interviewed on local news. Actually, I don't think this is local. This is ABC National, it looks like. She, of course, is a radio host and is used to being interviewed and doing interviews. But she also had a few stories that were really interesting. And to me, this was another must-see interview that happened yesterday and a must-see moment in reflection. Of course, we'll probably see a lot more of this at the funeral. And the link is in the description as to how to keep up with when the memorials and funerals will be for Jesse Jackson Sr. The family has a special website for that, and it's in the comment section of this live.
Singer and radio host Santita Jackson, it is an honor to have you with us.
I'm honored to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we have been reflecting a lot on your father, the public Reverend Jesse Jackson. But if you don't mind, take us home with you. Tell us about Jesse Jackson, your dad.
Well, if I could, I would like to speak to something that you just spoke about in the previous segment. My father was a man of tremendous courage. Indeed, he was the most threatened political presidential candidate in history up to that point in time. And he had to get his Secret Service protection well in advance of the January 1st start date. I think it was either the first or second day that he was running. And he was part of a group of men and women who were willing to die for their beliefs. We walked into those campaigns really wondering if he was going to be alive. That was a very, very real issue that we dealt with as a family. And our father and mother were very, very serious about our religious moorings, about our religious grounding. Indeed, that was the first thing that was one last thing that your father will ask you to do before you go away to college. He said, one more thing. I want you to find a church. He said, baby, because the storms of life, they hit without warning. And if your soul is not anchored in the Lord, you'll never make it. And that is grounded in his deep, deep, deep belief in God. And
so it's, once again, I mean, this is some real personal remembrances, and I'm sure we're going to find and hear a lot more of these in the coming days. But it's very familiar, of course, to what her brother said about how threatened their father was. And of course, one of the famous pictures that's out there that I used this morning at Black Virginia News is a a photo of Jesse Jackson Sr. at the funeral of Martin Luther King. So if anybody would know about the uncertainty of life, it certainly would be Jesse Jackson Sr.
as a Christian. And so that's part of my experience of Jesse Jackson of Reverend Jesse Jackson as a father. But of course, I can think of the fact that he took parenting seriously. He took our family seriously. So because he faced so many death threats before he ran for president, quite frankly, his presidential runs to us were more of the same in terms of the threats to his life. He made everything special. Every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every event, he would take us to work with him, not just in Chicago, but all around the country and all around the world, because he wanted us to see things. He said, I'm not going to leave you a lot of money. The money I've made, I follow Dr. King's example, I give it to the movement. But what I will try to do is give you a rich life, rich experiences where you're going to meet people, you're going to see things. Some of them will be famous, some of them will not be, but they will all be important. And so, like he didn't miss my prom night, my senior prom, which moved me greatly. He was on his way out of town to work. And he got to the airport and he said, I can't miss my baby. I can't miss this.
So, I mean, these are the stories that are really good. I put the link in the description. I can't really run the entire thing. I'd love to run the entire thing. But this is the type of thing to me that is kind of a must-see thing where we see these people telling the story of this person, this individual on a very personal level. Of course, you have the big, grand, historic information, the big, grand, historic facts that we all know. And then there are these stories about Reverend Jackson going to his daughter's going to the prom. I mean, who knew? So that was a really, again, it was a really interesting thing, and I learned a few things that that I had not known from that interview. Another thing, it's not that I didn't know about this, and I can remember being a teenager watching this, the 1988 convention. I just wanted to give a must-see shout out here to C-SPAN because C-SPAN dropped the video of the entire speech yesterday, which was not like you couldn't find it. You can find it in the archives of the C-SPAN website, but you got to go and you got to dig. Well, what they did was they said, well, we'll just drop the whole thing. I think it's 40 minutes or so. It is 53 minutes. And this is a stellar, unbelievable speech. The last 7 minutes of which are incredible. Roland Martin's right about that. But in fact, let's play a little bit of the last part of this. It's just such a memorable thing. It almost on the level of being a little bit chilling in terms of the delivery. Shout out to whoever the director in the control room were. The shots of the crowd, their reaction to what he's saying is a big part of why this is a special piece of video. An incredible thing in 1988. Which makes you realize that he bought up the speaking game of all the candidates after that. It was like after the 88 convention, all of a sudden everybody got really good at speaking or better than they thought they could be. The link is in the comments of the 1988 speech. It is 53 minutes. It is one of the most historic speeches in political history, modern political history. And that was at a time when there were a lot of really good speeches at the 84 and 88 conventions. So it's not lost on me that the 84 convention involved Governor Mario Cuomo. And you had Lloyd Benson in there who actually made a good speech. Ann Richards was in there. She made a good speech. There's a lot of folks that spoke at those two conventions, but it was really Jesse Sr. that really knocks the ball out of the park in a huge, huge way. And good for C-SPAN for dropping the video and making it very easy to find yesterday, all the clips of that speech. And there's a lot of other good parts of the speech that are quite good. My last must-see is going to be the show I was on last night, Roland Martin Unfiltered. Nobody is doing what Roland Martin is doing. When you do 4 hours of television on one subject, I don't care what the subject is, nobody does 4 hours of live TV on anything anymore. And of course, with the technology we have now, you can do exactly that. You can do 4 hours of live TV. I'm actually surprised that people don't take more advantage of YouTube, although people are starting to figure it out in terms of what YouTube allows you to do for free. And if you have the imagination and the time and the energy and the the ambition, you can really do a ton of stuff on YouTube. And as somebody who worked at ABC News in the 1990s, in the last years of Roone Arledge and the first years of Disney's ownership, I know what it looks like to put together a TV show without the technological advantages that we have now. Basically, we're getting out of the age of the VHS tape, and now we're not. But the Roland Martin Jesse special, which I suspect will continue in some form for the next week. I mean, this will go on. This is the other beauty of it. It's not just, last night. It will be last night. It will be days. I'm sure Roland will have days and days of tributes to Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. He will have interviews of historic figures who were there at the time, who can speak to what went on and what happened in the moment. That is going to be huge. He had some of that on last night. And I said, Choir Master Barry wasn't the only one. Reverend Moss. I mean, there were a few people, heavy hitters out there who were, standing next to Reverend Jackson at a lot of events, a lot of historic events. And Roland was able to get them on, as I say, as the days go on this week. It's only Wednesday. The week is young. You're going to see more of that. And there's just nobody else doing that. And we're living in a very weird era here of very short attention spans. And when somebody does a 4-hour tribute, a 3-hour, even a 2-hour tribute, that's a really, really big deal. And what happened last night, I was happy to sit on set to see some of these interviews, obviously to see Ben Crump. At the top of the show, he had, of course, Maxine Waters and Congresswoman Maxine Waters and Yvette Clarke speaking on Reverend Jackson. And like most of the other reels we've seen in tribute to Reverend Jackson, you're seeing a lot of really cool, photos from the time and photos from him marching and different things. And there was some original, never before seen video that Roland had of Reverend Jackson in the hospital. Nobody else has. I mean, it's just, you name it, it was here. I mean, there's a lot to say about this because nobody, and I mean nobody, is doing this type of thing. It doesn't happen in modern news television. or not modern news television. I mean, it's never happened before. So these are the types of pieces of video and the types of video content that you're not going to find anyplace else. And this is a must-see situation. It's great to have it on. A lot of times I'll have him on in the background. You have a long-form show that's giving you hard news. Again, rare. And you have it on 2 hours straight, 3 hours straight, in this case, 4 hours straight. It's just a really, and here I am in this clip right here. I'm not really one of the stars of this. I would say the 2 stars of the show last night, were Michael Brown and Cora Masters, and of course, Greg Carr. Anytime Greg Carr is on the set, it's a wrap, basically. I mean, he's going to be the best. He's going to be the best guest on the set. It's just the level of knowledge historically there is frightening and scary. Like, it's amazing. It is amazing. And, he's on with Karen Hunter too on the weekend, early on Saturday, which is great. And it's just like you are getting a historic education for free from Greg Carr anytime he's on the screen. So he's hitting a home run. And it was just so much to handle last night in terms of how much information and how many stories people were imparting. And when I saw Cora Masters walk onto the set, I said, oh my goodness, this is going to be wild.
When he said to the whole party, I got all these black votes and I got all these progressive white votes. What we going to do? And that was a real hardcore negotiation. And there were a lot of white folks in the party who were not happy that they had to kowtow to his demands, but he had the power and the leverage and the influence, and he maximized it.
Absolutely. I mean, the 88 convention, I was at 84 as a delegate, 88 as an alternate delegate, but also as a Jackson surrogate, which was kind of funny because he would send me someplace, they were looking for him, and they got me. And you can see their faces like, what is this? But he came in there bad and bold. As Arnwine said, the thing about Reverend Jackson is he was always bad and bold. And when I think about the economic underpinnings of his work, the fact is that he could go from the most micro to the most macro. In other words, my sister and he were very close. Bad joke, I won't tell it. Well, I might. When I went to see him in December, I said, the Valvo family sends regards. I said, James, Marianne, Mariette, Antoinette. He starts grinning when I say Antoinette. So, I'm ticked because he used to get on my nerves by either calling me Suzanne after my CNN cousin.
There's some really funny moments here. And yeah, this is crazy. I mean, this is crazy to have this group in the room, and I'm honored to be sitting with
84 and
them.
88.
Well, I was a student when he ran the first time, and I was in Atlanta when he won in 88. And I was also there in 92, and Bill Clinton benefited in 92, and Georgia went blue in 92 because of the work of Reverend Jackson. And so when when you said that, I jumped up because like, oh no, understand this. The politics, not just for Black folks, but the politics for the Democrats, the path he took. And for a lot of us, coming, being a student, doing voter registration, seeing how he was able to organize and mobilize. He mobilized us. Abel Mabel Thomas, right? You remember Abel Mabel?
God, I hadn't heard that name in 30 years. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is a 4-hour history lesson.
Everybody just starts hearing like, yes, it's clear. But that's only 20 years after Fannie Lou Hamer took a jackhammer to the party in Atlantic City.
Yep.
84 is only 12 years after Gary, where the threat of an independent Black political party is so problematic. You got Coleman Young in there, the Michigan delegation threatening to walk out, and Amiri Baraka, stone cold Black nationalists like Michigan. I got to come back. Queen Mother Moore talking about reparations. Who's at the podium? Jesse Lewis Jackson with their dashiki and that afro as Coretta Scott King and Betty Shabazz sit on stage.
Wow. And so this the level of memory for Greg Carr is extremely scary. I mean, the amount of knowledge that he has is off the chain. And as somebody who's a history major, I'm always sitting there going, how can you remember all of this? Right? It's like, I mean, I can remember some things, but man, it is just unbelievable the amount of stuff he can remember. And the amount of context he can put on a conversation. It just was, I'm telling you, man, I was really enjoying, listening to everybody on that set. Mustafa Santiago Ali had said something toward the end of the show, like, I'm honored to sit here and listen to, I think he was talking about Cora Masters Barry, but I sat there and I just thought, man, this is crazy that like you get to hear the first person histories of a time period, the 80s and 90s politically in Black politics.
84 caught him sleeping. 88, and we remember this because we was all headed to, I was in law school, we were headed to Atlanta to destroy the Democratic Party. Like you said, Jackson is coming there, and when he gave up all the delegates, we didn't understand the math, but your pop did, but we were discerned because we got it. We got it.
88 was sort of like how they felt in 64.
It's no question. Except we gonna take this. But here, what you raised though, Roland, is so very important. They decided at that point, we would rather commit political suicide in this country than let these Black people and these poor whites and these migrant workers and these coal miners capture one of the two parties. Remember, he had won Michigan.
Yep.
He's going to Illinois. That's in the books. Paul Simon drops out. These MFs, Biden, Clinton, they convinced Paul Simon to re-enter the race because he's the senator in Illinois to stop Jesse Jackson from winning Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah. I had totally forgotten about that. When he told that story, I said, holy smokes, that is what they did. Like it was all coming back to me. And the fact that, again, you have people who are first persons of history on this show. I want to sort of show a little bit of Cora Masters because that was, I couldn't wait till she started talking. This is me in my Norfolk State hat. I think that Norfolk State needs rep more than, well, I like Virginia Tech. I like wearing red, but I also love this Norfolk State
talking
hat.
heads, all of which were white at that time. It was the
Mhm.
90s, you know. And I was working with Amelia Bundles, who was the great, great, great of Madam C.J.
Mhm.
Walker. She was a producer there. She'd been a producer at NBC, and then she was a producer at ABC. She was the bureau chief, deputy bureau chief at ABC, actually, when I was there. At any rate, Reverend Jackson shows up, puts a bunch of pressure on the networks, not
Yeah, to make a long story short, Jackson showed up in the 90s when I was at ABC, and he was the first DEI officer. It was like no black people as producers. They actually hired a black producer as a result of his putting pressure on ABC. There were no black associate producers at the time in the Washington bureau, and finally they hired one, a fellow from Texas, and that was what they did. I mean, it all happened because of Jesse. It all happened because of Jesse Senior. The other thing was no black people really on the Sunday talks. Sunday talks would have a bunch of talking heads. None of them would be black. And he was like, I'm going to try to fix that. He put pressure on the network, and they changed their ways after that. And I don't think it ever changed back again. It was pretty. Jesse Senior would show up, focus on an issue, make change, and then go on to the next thing. And I remember being at ABC when he did that. This is Cora Masters Barry.
Amazing, complicated person. All of these stories you tell and more. I mean, he was connected in all of the genres, and one of them was Hollywood and Motown, and one of his very dear friends was Uric Abner, who was a family member of mine, and we were all up in the Hollywood Hills one night, 50 years ago. This really happened. Started at 11 o'clock, some kind of way. Jesse was the topic. He was the topic at 5 o'clock in the morning. That actually happened. And that's when I realized that he just, he was in charge. And so he was a very special human being. And what I loved the most about him was that he never didn't have time to sow into young people.
Mm-hmm.
If you know me, you know I started something called Southeast Tennessee Learning Center. My whole life has been young people. He went all over the country, going to schools with that chant, telling them, for your life, you got to feel good about yourself. And he used to tell me, it starts on the inside, so we got to keep connected with the young people. So while he was closing down people, and, my brother had a problem, a handicapped black guy, didn't know who he was. The people in the store grabbed him, almost killed him. Well, they killed him. My brother walking back and forth, a protest of my brother Bishop Masters, just how Rev operates, to your point. Back and forth, him, 5, 6 people, sometimes him by himself, about 2, 3 weeks. I said, well, what's happening? Well, we want them to do this, we want them to do that. I said, well, call Jesse.
Oh my goodness, this is some funny stuff here. I mean, this is really good. It is long, it is 4 hours, but again, a lot of information here, a lot of history here, a lot of interviews here. And again, I know he's going to do it again and again, people doing their personal remembrances. It really does matter, who tells the story from what perspective. Some people are telling it from a civil rights perspective. Some people are telling it from a personal perspective. Some people are telling it from a journalistic perspective. But the good news is that the narrative is controlled by the people who are actually there and nobody else. Our journalists now tend to be very young, and I think many of them were born after Jesse Senior was prominent. And so for them, it's kind of like they're rushing probably to Wikipedia to read really fast. What did this guy do so we can build this piece? Nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's people who come up all the time. I got to go study before I do anything or say anything. But these are the people who are actually there. A lot of these folks were actually there.
Know of any
There is no replacement for being there, for actually being on the scene.
other civil rights leader
This is Melanie Campbell.
who put women in positions of power and gave them opportunities to lead?
And also get mentored by Reverend Willie Barrow,
Yeah.
right? And the women he touched, Mignon Moore, Donna Brazil, and so many others. And so, he fought for, he would know about the civil rights, about human rights, but he also fought for women's rights, labor, Cleola Brown sent me a text from APRI, and somehow uh, she couldn't get in the building, though, just so you know. She was trying to get here. Yeah, she was trying to get on. But, you know, just the way he showed up to so many components of our movements we talked about tonight. But one that I'm glad you're bringing up is what he did when it came to showing up for women.
Yep.
And showing up for Black women and making sure that, you know, Black women's leadership was lifted up. So I will never forget those shoulders I know that I stand on in this role, in this movement. And so Reverend Jackson is someone that with Jeff Johnson, we can't let that legacy go. Because I know there were young people who I talked to today in my own office who just in being able to be a part of what was happening, because you say, let your life speak for you. On social media at 5 o'clock in the morning, as soon as I saw it, and I just picked up my phone and his legacy spoke that early in the morning. People were just responding and the kinds of messages that
I had that. You know, it's so funny. I actually found out at 4 in the morning. You know, interestingly enough, I have 2 phones. The phone that had the alerts on it was not the phone that I looked at. It was the other phone when I got up. I just sort of glanced at it. So it wasn't until about 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, I saw what was going on. And man, when I looked at my regular phone, boy, that you want to talk about, people must stay up all night, because it's incredible to me how many people were up at 3 and 4 in the morning with that news and, you know, texting it and the signal chain, the whole bit. So at any rate, I want to do a little bit more Cora Masters Barry before I cut out here.
The election of Reagan, the loss of Jimmy Carter for his second term. And he got up and he talked about the Bible story of David and Goliath, and how David didn't have anything. He had a slingshot. And he looked around and he saw the rocks. And he took those rocks and he used those rocks and he slayed that giant. And he talked about how many Black people in all of these major states that were registered to vote and did not vote. And the percentage of the people who did not vote were far beyond the percentage that Reagan won. He said you were just rocks just laying around.
It was this boy. She tells a story about non-voters and how Jesse reacted to people who didn't vote. It's incredible. Anyway, I've got the link in the comments once again of this 4-hour tribute to the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I've played probably too much of it. And I'm sure that copyright notice is coming, okay? Because anytime you play particularly Roland Martin Unfiltered, you will get a little notice from YouTube talking about, hey, you know, we're going to demonetize your video because you're paying too much, which I am playing too much. Kind of just remembering what we were all talking about last night. And, you know, typically when you're on a set for 4 hours, you are saying, I was starving the entire time and thinking, man, I cannot wait to get home to eat. But somehow or another, this was the video that nobody's ever seen before of Reverend Jackson in the hospital and Roland Martin with him. But at any rate, you know, the whole thing of it is that this is a great example of a community telling its own story without having to rely on anybody else to tell it. And we don't need anybody else to tell it. The technology that we have now allows you to do really whatever you want. And in fact, you should use it.
And of course, you can understand why our leaders would be reticent to be speaking truth to power. But it is amazing the level of corporate control that we see in our politics.
I gotta do my makeup differently. But at any rate, I gotta deal with some of these clips from last night. I'm sure the folks at Norfolk State will be thrilled. But we were talking about money in politics and how money controls advocacy in the Black community. Once again, Roland Martin Unfiltered and 4 hours, 4-hour tribute. And really incredible. I think the only other time I can remember us going for 4 hours was maybe election night. Obviously, election night's definitely more than 4 hours. And I have a feeling that maybe State of the Union might be it might be one of those, at least 2 or 3 hours of analyzing what the deal is with Donald Trump. At any rate, this is Lauren Burke. Those are my 5 must-sees. I, of course, lingered for a long time there on the last one. Roland Martin Unfiltered. This is a pretty amazing story. You do have the end of an era, sort of an end of an era civil rights leader. I would actually define him as the last civil rights leader because I don't know nobody can really step into his shoes in the same way, and nobody has. And since he became ill somewhere around 2016, 2017, there hasn't been anybody that's come close to Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., and there's nobody who's been able to take his place. There's been a void there. There's definitely a leadership void there. At any rate, this is Lauren Burke. This was Lauren Live. I will be back soon. I have to go to Richmond tonight for an event. That should be a lot of fun. Something different, something fun, something that's a party. But I will be checking in very, very soon.
Somewhere. What's going on? Thank you. Are you watching now?
Yeah. No, I was watching on the left, but it's excellent. I love it. I love the traffic's flowing up. You were in Brooklyn last night. Where?
I was in Bushwick.
Okay, my grandmother's house is in Crown Heights.
Oh, yeah.
So when I saw you, I was trying to look at what the pizza place was to see where
As soon as we got there, someone recognized the pizza place. They're like, we got to get out of here. Someone is
get out. It was great.
blowing up our spot.
This show was freaking fantastic.
Thank you.
Love it. Love it, man. Love it.